Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us here and coming out on such a rainy day. So we're going to be talking about the intersection of two things that are both very important. One is financial inclusion, and the other is behavior change, and how these two intersect. So with me is Jeff Kaiser. He's the COO of Propel, which is a new company, and he will tell you what it is they do. And Evelyn Stark, who's the Assistant Vice President for Financial Inclusion of the MetLife Foundation. Let me start with you, Jeff. By the way, I'm Tina Rosenberg. I am co-writer of the Fixes column for the New York Times, and I also wrote a book about behavior change using peer pressure called Join the Club, How Peer Pressure Can Transform the World. So I'll be putting in my 2 cents as well. So, Jeff, tell us a little bit about what is it you were trying to do with Propel, and what have you learned in developing the product about what works in terms of helping people to make better financial decisions?
Thanks so much, and thanks everybody for being here. Propel is a tech startup. We're based in Brooklyn. We make software for people who receive government benefits in the United States. The primary program we work with is the food stamps program. It's now called SNAP. And we make an app that allows SNAP recipients to manage their benefits, to check your balance, see your transaction history. It's a simple financial tool, but it's something that didn't exist before. There are 45 million people in this country who receive SNAP benefits. It's an enormous part of the population of this country. It's the most important part of the American social safety net. And we think it's a really important financial tool for 21 million households. The product that we built has been downloaded about 175,000 times in the last 10 months. And we're trying to make these benefits feel like and be managed as a financial tool. There are a number of challenges when it comes to how people spend their benefits, and we think we can have an impact without being paternalistic or telling people what they should do that helps people manage their benefits better.
Well, what's the particular problem that you're trying to solve with this?
So I think the very first part of this is just providing people with information. So prior to using our app, most people call a 1-800 number to check their benefit balance, and it's a big pain.
But you said most people actually don't call the 1-800 number.
Yeah, so people just assume that their benefits are there, and they go shopping, and maybe they're in the checkout line, and they don't have enough money, and they have an embarrassing moment at the cash register. So that's one problem, is just trying to make information more available so that people can make informed choices about what to do with their money. The other that the kind of academic literature on government benefits focuses on is the speed with which people spend their benefits. So if you get food stamps, you get them once a month in a lump sum deposit. And most people, the USDA has done a study that showed that most people spend about 75% of their benefits within the first 2 weeks of the month. Our data shows that it's actually even more severe than that our users are spending about 80% of their benefits within 9 days. And just by showing people where they spend their money and how much they have and what their patterns have been over the course of a few months, we think we can, again, help people try to make a decision that works for them. If they should be spending more over the course of the month, then we can empower that.
So just to be clear, without this product, people have no easy way to know how much of their food stamps money is left to keep them to the rest of the month.
Yeah, exactly. And we're talking about about 80. So if you receive food stamps, that accounts for about 80% of what you're spending on groceries, and that's just the basic component of feeding your family.
And give us 1 or 2 major lessons that you've learned in developing this product about what works and what doesn't work.
So I think one is that people's needs are different. So in some cases, if you live far from a Costco and you've bought a Costco membership, it might make sense for you to go to the store once a month and spend your full benefit deposit, and make that last the month. Now there is research that shows that people are better at managing money than they are, or budgeting money than they are at budgeting food. So for people who spend their benefits once a month, they tend to their caloric intake goes down at the end of the month, much more so than people who actually smooth the spending over the course of the month. So, but we know that there are...
And you're not going to be buying a lot of produce if you're shopping once a month.
Exactly, yeah. But again, for some people that makes sense, and we don't want to tell you what you should and shouldn't do. But if we can make a tool available that helps anchor you on this idea of, a weekly budget rather than a one-time deposit, perhaps that's a way that we can influence how people think about this money.
Great. Okay, Evelyn, you've worked across a wide variety of, supporting a wide variety of tools to increase financial inclusion. What are some lessons you can tell us about what you found works and doesn't work?
I think the idea of simply talking to customers is one that financial service players are not always great at. And so the tools and products that I've seen actually work to help people save more or help people consolidate debt, improve their credit score, or start saving for long term, the first thing that any of those providers do is talk to the customer. We see a lot of products that are simply miniaturized versions of products that are available for wealthier people that just don't work for low-income people. The minimum balance is way too high. The strictures on withdrawals are too high, and it doesn't take into account what and how low-income people want to use funds.
So are they designing these products without talking to potential clients?
Absolutely. It's something of a norm. So if most of you have been to an ATM machine in the last couple of weeks, for example, it spits out $20 bills. Low-income people don't actually want $20 bills. They want $10 bills, or fives, or even singles, if that's a possibility. So when you take an ATM machine that's pre-programmed for 20s and put it into a neighborhood, a low-income neighborhood, and you wonder why nobody uses it, well, you haven't talked to anybody. You haven't seen what they actually want. You haven't asked them.
So principle one, talk to your clients, right? Very, very advanced thinking here. What else?
I think a lot of organizations, and this is one of the reasons that we really like what Propel is doing, they don't design for the IT department.
Propel doesn't, you mean?
Propel does not design for the IT department. They design for the customer. I've done, not with MetLife Foundation, but I've worked and lived in sub-Saharan Africa where mobile money is the big success story. But in some countries, the menu's in English, which is not the dominant language. And people have to navigate through a menu simply by memorizing that the fourth item is what you need to press, and then on the next screen, the second item is what you need to press. But even if you are literate, it doesn't matter because it's not in a language that you read. So they've designed it very nicely for an IT department, but not very nicely for the actual end user customer.
Could you talk a little bit about why mobile money has been so successful? I mean, what can we learn from that in terms of designing other products?
So mobile money, there's a couple of hundred mobile money deployments, and there's less than a dozen successful mobile money deployments. So it's been successful where it's been successful for a large part because they looked at the market, because they talked to people, because they put in the right kind of human interaction supports, agent networks, and they made that investment. But other countries have made pretty big errors in it, aiming it towards only low-income people, for example, which, actually I think the SNAP benefit is such an interesting one. Back in the day when I worked as a cashier, once you saw someone pull out the SNAP check or the food stamp check, everyone online just groaned, right? And so mobile money in some countries that's targeted as low income, who wants to announce, hi, I'm poor, I'd like to show you my mobile money account because I'm poor. Whereas in the countries where it's worked because everybody uses it.
That's interesting. Mm-hmm. I live on the Lower East Side, and in my supermarket, everybody obviously uses a card for their SNAP, but the card is not located with the cashiers. The cashiers have to leave their station, go over to a counter. So it's an announcement. Here's a person who's using food stamps.
Yeah, what club do you want to be in?
Right. Right. So Jeff, you talked about you're doing a very interesting test right now of anchoring and information. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. I referenced it in my first remarks, but we're working with a lab at Duke University. It was founded by Dan Ariely, the behavioral economist, and the idea is to test whether the concept of anchoring people on a weekly budget helps smooth spending over the course of the month. So right now, when people are using our app to check their benefits, they see, whether it's on the first of the month or the third of the month, they've received their, let's say, $350 deposit for the month. There's a windfall effect that comes with seeing that, and people rush to the grocery store. And you can talk to, and we do talk to grocery stores in low-income neighborhoods that have to stock up and staff up at the beginning of the month just to handle that kind of influx. And that's fine, and it makes sense, again, for many people. But if instead of just showing that $350 deposit, what if we also show people, and this is what it would be like, this is what the amount would be if you budgeted it for every week. So instead of $350, it's 70 whatever dollars per week, we just put that there, very clearly marked as this is not your balance. It's just a recommended weekly budget.
So you're just dividing it by 4,
It's exactly
essentially.
right. Yeah.
Okay, and you think that might make a difference?
We want to see. So again, we're not going to do anything without data and evidence. We're not just going to put it in there and assume that it's right. But we're going to run an A/B test actually starting this week. I think to 2,000 people. And we'll look at how their spending changes. Look at how much they're, I think over a 3-month period, we'll look at their spending patterns.
What's the principle behind that? Why would that possibly make a difference?
So the behavioral principle is this idea of anchoring. So if people see that they, especially with the word recommended, there's something powerful in that, which is that this is something you maybe should be doing. This is the amount of money that is supposed to last you a month, and previously you've been spending it in 2 weeks, and even after you've spent your money for the month, we're still going to show you that recommended weekly budget and see if the next month perhaps spending starts to change a little bit.
Okay. This is interesting because it just seems so obvious that I have a monthly check and I have 4 weeks to spend it. Let's divide it by 4. Anyone can do that themselves, and yet this is something that might actually make a difference. Evelyn, could you talk about that, why something that simple might be able to help, and whether maybe in other fields what we've learned about behavior change that might shed light on that?
Sure. In financial services, one of the big successes in the U.S. is the increased use of 401k. Retirement savings. But that didn't come about because people took a financial education class and started thinking about, I'm going to work for 40 years and then hopefully I'll retire for 30 years, so let me do the math and I will, put this much money away. Instead, it came about because employers started opting you directly into a 401 account.
Instead of you have to check the box to participate, you have to check the box to not participate.
Correct.
Okay.
And most employers also opt you into an amount, which is usually around 3 or 4% of your paycheck. What's interesting is that 3 or 4%, so which is something else that I think some employers are looking at. That came from a research study. That's the number that the researchers used. When it proved so effective, it kind of spread, except that 3 or 4% of your income is not going to help you too much when you retire, not unless you don't plan on using your income for very long. So it should be 8 or 10%. So now you have this idea of how do we move people to that level.
So people are anchored at 3 or 4%.
Yeah, and it may be who's getting anchored. It's probably not the employee, because this is another set it and forget it model. We don't usually think about it. It's probably your HR department that put it on the form last year and the year before and the year before, and we need to move them. So that's also the other, who's the right influencer and influence strategy in order to make changes happen.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you write a lot about this. I don't know. I'm curious to hear what you've seen in terms of what works and.
Well, thank you for asking. To me, the most important lessons that I have learned are giving people information is not the same as changing behavior and giving them motivation, which I know, Evelyn, you've also talked a lot about. People have to have a reason to apply it to themselves. 2, using fear does not work. 3, the expertise flaw. If you are an expert in this subject matter, you are uniquely unqualified to design a product because your audience is not an expert and you are going to be making assumptions that they are not making. So you have no idea. You can't unlearn what you've learned, so you have no idea what they think. To me, though, the most important lesson and the most intriguing is the power of social norming. I mean, we tend to when we hear about a problem and we want to get people to do something about it, we tell them how widespread the problem is. 1 in 3 Latina women has diabetes. Ooh, that's terrible. In fact, what you're doing is showing that bad behavior is the norm. There were some interesting experiments with campus drinking where they found that the single most useful thing to do is to tell people, do surveys of how much people actually drink and tell people about that. Because students were grossly overestimating how much they thought their peers were drinking, and they were responding to that peer pressure. But once they found out that actually, no, most students drink moderately, then that peer effect went away. You want to norm good behavior. Towels. How many people of you have stayed in a hotel room and seen a little card in the bathroom that says, please hang up your towels to save the environment? Anybody done that? Okay. Actually, the most useful argument, the thing that actually creates behavior change and gets people to hang up their towels is most people hang up their towels. And actually, even more effective than that, most people who stayed in this hotel room hang up their towels. Why would that work? It's because when we don't know what to do, we take our cues from people like us. And so it's very important not to show that people are behaving badly. It's very important to show that actually people are behaving well. So can either of you have anything concrete to say about that? Can you riff off that?
This example, there was an advert that was that looked at pictures of empty chairs stacked up, and each chair represented a student that didn't graduate from school. And it was supposed to drive an indication that, this is terrible that there are so many empty chairs. I think it would stack up to the height of the Empire State Building, if I'm not mistaken. It was supposed to drive people to stay in school, and it had the exact opposite effect because it normed dropping out. In the olden days of the 1950s, 1960s, when people got married, your father-in-law or mother-in-law might give you a life insurance policy as a wedding gift. It was kind of a normal gift. Now you get a quilt or a kitchen set. So where did that norm go? And as you might know, life insurance usage has dropped. In Malawi, it's a small story, but anecdotal. These women started giving the brides-to-be their own savings account on a card, and it was something that maybe you've always heard, that a wife should always have her own account, right? And that had just somehow translated over. And pretty soon, all the women in that village were giving, as a wedding gift, your own bank account. So, these are, once they become norms and people see that they make sense and they're positive, they really can take off.
I mean, Jeff, is there any thought in Propel, for example, to show people, here's how people typically spend a week's budget. They buy X number of this and X number of that. I mean, to set a social norm?
Yeah, we've thought about it. I think one of the challenges right now is that the actual norm across the board isn't necessarily the thing that you want to be promoting. So perhaps if this test works and that we can show, that using this, little feature, we can influence behavior, then we can maybe use that. But
well, you can get around that. Here's how people endorse spending their budget, exactly. Or millions of people spend this way. I mean, there's always some way you can talk about how many people are behaving well.
And we actually do that with, we think of SNAP benefits as a financial tool, but we also so our users are the most financially vulnerable population in the US, and we think we have an opportunity and a role to help them access other financial services. So we're partnering with a number of kind of fintech companies that are offering better versions of the products that many of our users use. And in some of the marketing for that, we're using some of these types of tactics. So we're working with an online checking account and trying to get people to sign up for checking accounts. And some of the messaging is around, most people in the U.S. have a checking account. Do you? Those kinds of things. So.
What about financial aid for schools? Do you have any thoughts on how that can be made easier and more accessible that might encourage more low-income people to think that I too can go to college?
So I have a little twist on that I think is super interesting, that we're working with community colleges and MDRC. They're doing something called Aid Like a Paycheck for Pell Grant recipients. So you get your Pell Grant, which pays your tuition, and then you get the remainder in cash, which is a big amount of money right as the semester starts. At some schools, they actually call this like refund day and bonus day. And as you might imagine, bonuses get spent a lot more quickly than paychecks. So with this project, it's called Aid Like a Paycheck. And so that remainder fund, the students get every other week, just like a paycheck would come in. And it usually, the idea is that by the middle of the semester, your bonus money, if you took it as a bonus, would have run out, and you start picking up extra shifts at Target or wherever you're working, which means you're not studying for your midterms, et cetera. So whereas if your aid package is your paycheck, going to school is your job. So, that's an idea where it makes a big difference just on a very simple change.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So we have 8 minutes and 27 seconds left. So let's open it to questions. And
I'm just going to steal a microphone that should be lying around here.
okay, we can do that, or you can say your question and we can repeat it because I know we're recording this. That might be speedier, but if you have a question, raise your hand and we'll test this out. Question about behavior change, about financial inclusion?
I just think your app is so exciting, and I'm wondering, what is the story behind it? How did it come to be?
What is the story behind the Propel app?
Yeah, sure. I'll try to be brief and happy to share more after. But we got started in a fellowship program here in New York that's now sponsored by the Robin Hood Foundation. It's called Blue Ridge Labs, and their whole mission is to take people from kind of Silicon Valley software development world and look at the problems of low-income New Yorkers and try to come up with innovative technological solutions to social problems. So we got started building actually a different product, which is to help people apply for food stamps. It's an incredibly complex process. We built that product first, and we realized there's actually a larger need in terms of the sheer number of people who already are on benefits, who are going through this arduous process of calling a hotline or just spending their benefits without knowing. So yeah, that's the.
Great. Over here.
Hey, this is for Propel as well. I was just curious. I heard of Dan O'Reilly, and I've seen his TED Talks, but I'm curious how you're working together with him in the lab and how that's helping. And then just maybe some of other A/B tests that you've done in the past that's shown behavior. I really like the ATM example that someone else mentioned.
Yeah, so Evelyn's MetLife Foundation is one of Common Sense's, I think, largest only funder. So she can speak about more about them. But we were invited to their conference in Mountain View earlier this year and had some just really, really thought-provoking conversations with Dan and with Wendy, who's one of the other co-founders. And they hadn't really worked in benefits before, and they were really excited about what we were doing. And so they said, we'd love to work with you. And so we, over the course of the last few months, have been tinkering with a variety of different ideas of the types of behaviors we want to influence. Our biggest challenges early on were kind of encouraging people to download and then sign up, go through our registration process. I think we were fortunately able to surpass most of those challenges, and now we're thinking about all the more, I think, actually interesting, behavioral issues of how can we influence spending behavior. Other A/B tests. In the sign-up flow, basically how to describe how we deal with personal information. So we have A/B tested kind of the language copy around what we do with your personal information.
Do you want to say something in response to his question?
Sure. I mean, one of the reasons that we decided to work with Dan is not just because he's a strong behavioral economist and has a good team, part of it was also the tech and his willingness to remain skeptical all along. So the big issue with cards, everyone loves cards, except that because you can't see your balance on your card, they actually encourage you to spend more. So the more and more digital that we go, in some ways we lose control over our cash. I don't remember the data, but the amount of money on Starbucks cards is astronomical. So, you know, we like that Dan was skeptical about digital, but also not so skeptical that he wasn't looking at where's the power of digital where it can help food stamps and help other people actually work well together. So that was why we chose Common Sense.
Interesting.
Sorry, one last thing. In regards to another example like the ATM, because I was very curious because there's other apps like Movin and different fintech apps that specifically focus on individuals and financial behavior. I'm really curious from the low income standpoint, like are there other examples besides the ATM that you could comment on? As to why a low income user base would be different when it comes to financial behavior, different from other fintech apps that are treating the user the same regardless. When it comes to that kind of behavior?
So not necessarily an app example, but just things like why do people go to check cashers? It seems counterintuitive. But part of the reason, for example, is if you put a check in on Friday afternoon, which is when people get paid, it doesn't clear till Monday. But you may need to write checks on Saturday and Sunday. Right? Or you might need cash on Saturday and Sunday. So people will go to a check casher and lose the 2.5% in order to get the cash right now. So there are apps that, this is a little twist on it, that allow you to withdraw your money as you earn it. So they work with employers. And so before the 2-week paycheck is due, I can get 7 days of that cash, which means my paycheck can go into my bank account. It can take its time to clear. I can make my other payments without getting an overdraft fee. So there are people who are trying to disrupt even the check casher who's disrupting the checking account problem as well.
Interesting. Yes.
My question is regarding the Propel app. How are you getting SNAP recipients? How are you raising awareness with them? Because I know that a lot of times they actually don't hear about the services. So how are you getting the word out to them?
It's a great question. There's a ton of misinformation in the SNAP world, and so it's actually been really hard. There are lots of rumors because you can't actually get good information from the government most of the time. We market on Facebook and Google, which is incredibly powerful, and we can reach a lot of people that way. We get about 50% of our downloads from word of mouth. So people tell others about this app because that's how word spreads, because it's so hard to get information from a reliable source. People talk in their communities about how to deal with these things. How do you renew your benefits? When do you have to renew your benefits? So we've been really lucky to have a lot of word of mouth growth, and we also have partnerships with a number of nonprofits, direct service nonprofits that work in these communities, and so they can put our flyers out or talk to users about what we do.
So this other question was about the power of social norms. You mentioned a case study about the number of children in school and the dropouts. When exactly did that case study come out? Or do you have like an idea?
I don't know. I haven't heard about that.
I don't know, but the advertisement was the shape of the Empire State Building. So if you Google something around there, you might find it.
It's incredibly common, though, and in part it's because people feel like, I want to show how important this problem is by showing the dimension of it, and allows me to be cynical for a minute. That allows me to raise more money, to get more press coverage. Unfortunately, it's counterproductive, but it's very rare to find any attempt to get people to change their behavior that doesn't have as a part of it, look how many people are behaving badly. Yep. Other questions? I'd like to give someone else a chance. If there's nobody else, then you go ahead. Anybody else? Oh, over here. Actually, we have 31 seconds, so go fast.
So there was mention of an app that you said that it wasn't even in the right language. when you're in sub-Saharan Africa, do you have any other examples of sort of a miscommunication or something like that with an app that just doesn't take into account the end user?
I mean, I think there's about 1 million advertisements that will prove this, like the classic Chevy Nova, right? Nova. You don't want a
Spanish.
car that can't go. So it's pretty bad. And I don't know if you've all seen the Galaxy Note 7 and Apple 7's problems in Hong Kong. 7 is a slightly dirty word when translated into Cantonese. So, I mean, I think that this is kind of endemic when we translate directly from our head without thinking about how's the user going to hear this, see this, respond to this. And you can do it even faster and wider on apps.
Jeff, did you?
It's also the world that we live in of government websites. So, I mean, government does not think about the end user when they're designing software products. They think about, ticking off boxes in an RFP. So we're integrating with a number of government websites that, I mean, you couldn't possibly use them on a smartphone. Sometimes you get a pop-up that says, must be used on Internet Explorer 9 or earlier. And you can't possibly use these websites.
Actually, just for fun, I downloaded the Snap enrollment form. And I mean, first of all, printing it out was 45 pages.
Oh my God.
So it was ridiculous, totally ridiculous.
Okay. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you to our panelists, Jeff and Evelyn, and enjoy your day. We'll be around for a little bit longer if you want to come up and chat in person. Bye.